Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you kindly for stopping by. My home thoughts return to Jorge Luis Borges, and I suppose it's following on from yesterday's quotation from Rumi. You've wakened not out of sleep, but into a prior dream, and that dream lies within another, and so on to infinity, which is the number of grains of sand. The path that you are to take is endless, and you will die before you have truly awakened. I'm going to put up that photo of the two male rhinos, white rhinos in fact, up lower. They were so grand against that landscape. And a link to It Felt Like a Kiss. No, it's not hot chocolate, but it's extremely good. It's part one, and there are 4 parts in this documentary. Just play it on background and see what you think. Political Reflections. African leaders vote to give themselves immunity from war crimes. African leaders gathered for a continent-wide summit voted to give themselves and their allies immunity from prosecution for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide at a new African Court of Justice and Human Rights. The decision comes as the continent confronts human rights violations and has 2 sitting presidents and 1 ousted president facing charges at the ICC. Amnesty International called it a backward step in the fight against impunity and a betrayal of victims of serious violations of human rights. At a time when the African continent is struggling to ensure that there is accountability for serious human rights violations and abuses, it is impossible to justify this decision, which undermines the integrity of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights, even before it becomes operational. This is Amnesty again. The decision came Friday at an African Union summit vote in Equatorial Guinea, from which journalists were excluded, Amnesty International said. News of the vote was imparted obliquely in a statement Monday night about the summit outcomes. A paragraph listing legal instruments agreed to at the meeting included the Protocol on Amendments to the Protocol on the Statute of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights. That amendment bars the court from prosecuting sitting African leaders and vaguely identified senior officials. 42 African and international civil society and rights groups had objected to the amendment, noting in an open letter before the summit that the impunity violates international and domestic laws as well as the constitution of the African Union. And Simon Allison of the South African-based Institute for Security Studies wrote in an op-ed piece before the vote that there are enough compromised African leaders who might stand to benefit from the immunity on offer. And obviously it's a retrograde step, but and unfortunate as well. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has called for holy war, according to Al Jazeera, issued the call to jihad in an audio message lasting nearly 20 minutes that was posted online on Tuesday. He called on them to rise up and avenge the alleged wrongs committed against their religion from Central African Republic to Myanmar. By Allah we will take revenge, by Allah we will take revenge, even if after a while, he said. They have a statement that will cause the world to hear and understand the meaning of terrorism, and boots that will trample the idol of nationalism, destroy the idol of democracy, and uncover its deviant nature. Fragmentation risks have popped big over the radar are my conclusions, and I think we're going to see a splitting up of Iraq and many other places in that arc of North Africa and the Middle East. This announcement by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was made on the first day of Ramadan, the Muslim holy day, and I conclude again by saying the is, because it's no longer the ISIS or the ISIL. The is a dagger pointed at Maliki's heart, and in fact at Khamenei's as well. The Pentagon has announced it's sending attack helicopters to Iraq. I'll put up a photograph of an Apache helicopter. And then an interesting piece on Bloomberg, why Turkey now wants Iraq to break up. The even split between Erdogan and the main opposition means that Turkey's Kurds will be the kingmakers. For them, any concern over Erdogan's authoritarian bent pales next to securing an independent Kurdish state in Iraq and a better deal for themselves in Turkey. Erdogan is letting them know he is the man to deliver both. At the Council on Foreign Relations, Stephen Cook, just back from Iraqi Kurdistan, told me Barzani can make Erdogan king of Turkey, and Erdogan can make Barzani king of Kurdistan. That's a powerful lobby for the breakup of Iraq. International markets, Dow and S&P have ended at records. Dow Jones rallied 129.47 points to close at 16,956.07. S&P gained 1309 points to close at 1973.32. And the Nasdaq short up 50.47 points to close at 4458.65. I'll put up a one-year chart showing the Dow Jones, the S&P, and the Nasdaq. Currency markets, the euro is at 136.76, touched a 6-week high of 137.10 on Tuesday, and has gained about 2 US cents in 3 weeks. Dollar index 79.85, drifting up from 79.837, which was drifting up from a 2-month trough of 79.74. Yen 101.58, Swissy 0.8875. But lots of commentary out of chart people that it looks as if it's headed back to test that barrier at 120. Pound 171.53 touched 171.67 on Tuesday, its highest since October 2008. You know what I feel about the pound. I remain very, very bullish. Aussie 0.9462, but jumped almost a cent to above 95 US cents for the first time since early November yesterday. Indian rupee 59.98, South Korean won multi-year highs at 10.09, Rial 220.32, Egyptian pound 71459. We've been here for a great deal of time. And the rand 1069.54. Concerns about the strike, obviously. China's final reading of the HSBC Market Purchasing Managers Index for June rose to 50.7 from 49.4 in May. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I think, we're near the bottom of the trading range now. Let's see how we operate around here. Euro dollar, very resilient, notwithstanding a 0.5% CPI inflation rate. Sterling, I'm going to put up a 6-month chart. This is 2008 highs, touched 170.167 yesterday, highest since October 2008. I'm looking now for 173.22, 173.80, and I think we might well see 2-to-1 at some point. And I wrote about this on the 12th of August when I said, how does an investor play this recovery? I think you need to be net long sterling. Gold, 1325.085. I'll put up a 1-year chart. I think it's expensive up here. Crude oil, 105.41. I think it's a trading buy. This is the lowest close since June 11. South Korean won multi-year highs again, 10,009. I'll put up a 1-year chart of that. Coming here to Africa, interesting report in the Africa report. Britain-Zimbabwe relations, a tale of demonization. Diplomatic relations between the governments of Britain and Zimbabwe have been fractious for over a decade now. The difficult relations between the two countries overlapped with political and economic upheaval in Zimbabwe as President Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF party seized white-owned commercial farmland and cracked down on rising domestic opposition in the shape of Morgan Tsvangirai's MDC party, which it saw as sponsored by the British government. Mugabe was one of those people the British Empire created, who specialized in knowing how to twist the British government's tail. Lynn Norman writes that demonization occurs when one actor portrays his enemy as a devil or demon or in league with them. When Mugabe was invited to the 2008 World Food Summit, the British government criticized his invitation by stating that this is like Pol Pot going to a human rights conference, which headlines such as "Evil Mugabe stole our farm" or Hitler Mugabe launches revenge terror attacks became a staple diet in British newspapers from 2000 onwards. These examples of demonization helped forge a perception in Britain that Mugabe was somehow evil, and that it was good British government's duty to take a strong moral stand on Mugabe's leadership. Mugabe's favoured London St James's Hotel as his residence during his periodic visits to Britain in the 1990s. From their many meetings in St James's, former British Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs Lord Douglas Hurd recalled in an interview that Mugabe was one of those people the British Empire created who specialised in knowing how to twist the British government's tail. He was well trained in the art of annoying the British if he needed to. He knew our ways. When Mugabe was stripped of his knighthood by the British government in 2008, he quipped, "We continue to respect the Queen. It is the demons in 10 Downing Street that need to be exorcised." In saying that the task now, so it seems, is for Britain and Zimbabwe to de-demonize each other in a slow path towards re-engagement. And I spoke about this on the 3rd of June 2014 when I said, Lena, there's an interesting linguistic inflection point in Zimbabwe of late. I was referring to comments from Chinamasa and from President Mugabe as well. And I was laying praise at the feet of Dominique Finitza, who has been spending a great deal of time in Zimbabwe. I think it's early days, but there is a definite trend change. Ups and downs are physiological in a floating exchange rate, Domenico Finitza said last year, and I quite like that comment. At the beginning of the year, I sort of predicted that African markets would make it a 3-year bull run phenomenon. And I said in particular, I feel that the international investor component invested in Africa Inc. remains a long way below benchmark, and that the move towards benchmark is a long way to go and is a big macro structural thing. And I was referring then to the fact that we were going to have our big Wembley Stadium moment with the Eurobond. And I said, that I expected the government to slot the Eurobond market the full $2 billion, which they did. This Eurobond issue will release the pressure cooker that is the domestic bond and interest rate markets. We should see a good rally in interest rates. Hopefully the banks will go for some volume and not just spread, and the economy can get juiced a little on lower interest rates. South Africa's biggest labour union started an indefinite strike over pay at steel-making and engineering companies, threatening an economy still reeling from a 5-month platinum mining walkout. About 220,000 members of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa are seeking wage increases above 10% from companies including Bell, Evraz, Vanadium, etc. The strike is indefinite, said the NUMSA President Andrew Cherwa. The only way to end the strike is to have a reasonable offer on the table. It's a fallacy in this country that anybody will live with any wage increase that's related to CPI. Africa's second largest economy contracted 0.6% in the 3 months through March as the mine workers strike shut shafts. Clearly, we're not going to get much of a recovery just yet. But on that note, I'll put up a photograph I took of the Johannesburg sunset when I was there last, and refer you to an article I wrote on the 7th of April, which is linked on Rich Wrap-Up, Snapshots from South Africa and its role in Africa's economy, where I was basically saying I think the economy is at the bottom and it's set to pick up from where it is now. Obviously that pickup might get a bit delayed with this strike. South African all-share closed at an all-time high. It's up 11.2936% this year, going back to what I was writing in early January about a 3-year bull market phenomenon. Dollar rand, I'll put up a 3-month chart. Still in this trading range we've been in between 10.30 and 11. But I think, hopefully we'll get some more positive news coming out of the Labour side, and I think that will help the rand move towards 10.30. Egyptian pound at 7.1473. The Egyptian stock market jumped 1.13% yesterday. It's up 20.3479% this year. The Nigerian all shares at a more than 5-year high. It's up 3.101%. so far this year, and has seemingly been able to see through the Boko Haram noise. Interesting article on Yahoo about how Boko Haram had developed a very diversified and resilient model of supporting itself, said Peter Pham, a Nigerian scholar at the Atlantic Council think tank in Washington. When Washington imposed sanctions in June 2012 on Boko Haram leader Abu Bakr Shekau, he dismissed it as an empty gesture. 2 years later, Shekau's skepticism appears well-founded. We're not talking about a group that is buying sophisticated weapons of the sort that some of the jihadist groups in Syria and other places are using. We're talking AK-47s, a few rocket-propelled grenades, bomb-making materials. It is a very low-cost operation. It includes paying local youth just pennies a day to track and report on Nigerian troop movements. Much of Boko Haram's military hardware is not bought, it is stolen from the Nigerian army. And then saying, they've been raiding distant military outposts and taking equipment from there. Boko Haram's inner leadership is security savvy, not only in the way it moves money, but also in its communications, relying on face-to-face contact, since messages or calls can be intercepted. They're quite sophisticated in terms of shielding all of these activities from legitimate law enforcement officials in Africa, and certainly our own intelligence efforts trying to get glimpses and insight into what they do, a former US military official said. US officials acknowledge that the weapons that have served Washington so well in its financial warfare against other terrorist groups are proving less effective against Boko Haram. My sense is that we have applied the tools that we do have, but that they are not particularly well tailored to the way that Boko Haram is financing itself. Of course, I take you back to that article I wrote on the 22nd of April, when I said, when I quoted Abu Bakr Shekau addressing President Goodluck Jonathan when he said, "We are in your city," and I said that comment could have been made by al-Shabaab, and saying that both Boko Haram and al-Shabaab represent a risk that David Lipton, who was speaking on behalf of the IMF, said the new risks are geopolitical. I was saying that he did not touch on, and that being asymmetric risks. The recent bombings in Abuja and last year's attack on Westgate confirmed the potency of asymmetric risks. I was saying then African markets have taken these risks in their stride. And I said they might stumble if these asymmetric risks ratchet higher, and they have not so far stumbled. In Maiduguri, a bomb in a van carrying charcoal exploded in a busy market, killing at least 20 people. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 10.647% in 2014, but of course your gains have been eroded by the Cedi. I'm coming to that at the moment. There were protests. Ghana protesters demanded Mahama act to revive economic growth yesterday in Accra. Marched to demand President John Dramani Mahama act on corruption and help revive economic growth in a country where Africa's worst performing currency in 2014 is adding pressure on inflation. Petition was handed to Valerie Sawyer, Mahama's Deputy Chief of Staff, convener of a group called Concerned Ghanaians for Responsible Governance, which organized the protest in the capital, Accra. I'm part of today's protest because of tomorrow and the next generation, said Jones Demotte, a 34-year-old real estate developer. Our Cedi is almost valueless. I'm losing my job because everything's expensive. Inputs are so high, Ghanaians cannot afford my houses. Obviously, economic growth is going to slow down dramatically this year. Moody's cut the nation's credit nation's credit rating one level to B2 last week. Cedi has fallen an incredible 29% this year against the dollar, so it's been frightening. Somebody else saying the president saying in this current phase of our development, we've been met with several obstacles and challenges. You can say that again. I want to assure you that we will create change. Last time he said he was looking for a homegrown solution to the problems. In my view, there isn't one. And the sooner he sort of disavows himself of that notion and gets to deal with the situation at hand, the better. I'll put up a photograph of a street in Accra yesterday, refer you back to the article I wrote on the 28th of April, where I said rising fiscal imbalances region's Achilles heel. And I said my takeaway is the tailwinds remain favourable for Africa rising, but that the markets are no longer as benign and that we would be wise to look very closely how policymakers are getting crunched in places like Ghana. A more than 30% collapse in a currency is a direct cause and effect of poor policy making. I said then putting Humpty Dumpty together again is not an easy thing. Kenya media company linked to Uhuru Kenyatta offers free daily newspaper. MediaMax began offering its newspaper for free as it seeks to become the country's biggest selling daily. The People Daily, previously cost 68 US cents, is being distributed free of charge nationwide from yesterday, said the CEO Ian Fernandez. Content in the publication will also target younger, better educated, more affluent readers than it did previously to draw advertisers. We want to increase our circulation, Fernandez said. We are number 2 in the market. We are targeting to be the top. That's what wins the hearts and minds of advertisers. Of course, MediaMax competes with Nation Media. The Kenyatta family owns a company that holds a stake in MediaMax, said Fernandez. The owners, I said this, the owners have deep pockets and possess political raison d'etre. And most probably the goal is to give the allies of the president a platform that can reach the masses. While offering the paper for free could be considered a brave move, it remains to be seen if the model will turn a profit. Fernandez said the People's Daily currently had a circulation of 110,000 compared to the Nation's 170,000 and Standard's 48,000. He said free daily newspapers are being operated successfully in most first world cities. The business model is similar to that of the free television and radio, whereby advertising revenues pay for the cost of content gathering, production and distribution. I wrote about our media economy in November 2013 when I said it's seriously valuable, very innovative and an outlier on the African continent. Group EcoBank is to inject 8.8 billion shillings, which is nearly $100 million, into its Kenya unit for expansion, coming in phases. 2.2 billion has already been put in. I wrote that piece, there was a plane crash this morning at Utawala near the GSU camp. This plane was heading to Mogadishu, cargo plane, 4 people killed, I'm afraid. I wrote that piece over the weekend. Tourism's contribution to Kenya cannot be ignored. If you haven't read it, please read it. I did an interview last week with Titus Naikuni after the release of the full year results. Please have a look at that. I also did an interview with Alex Bugwa, the Chief Financial Officer, and I also filmed the entire earnings release. So if you're interested in any of that, or Kenya Airways or African Aviation, go and have a look at that. It's pretty interesting. ARM Cement has completed a takeover of Kigali firm after 65% stake buyout. ARM has taken full control of Rwandese company Kigali Cement. Of course, they're doing plenty of things, expanding its cement production and distribution in the region, increasing market presence in Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, set to commission its Tanga plant, which has a capacity to produce 1.2 million tons of cement per year, also set to start construction of its $300 million Kitui factory in October with a daily output capacity of 8,000 tons. If you're interested in the share price data, please have a look on Rich Wrap-Ups, where I put a link in. Kenya shilling last at 87.747. This is referencing the increase in price of crude oil and the fact that Kenya has had to pay a higher price to import this time round. Nairobi All Share rallied 1.1571% yesterday. It's up 11.313% this year and is now within 0.366% of an all-time high set on the 12th of May. NSE 20, 1 point below and unchanged for the year, has rebounded 251 points since the 17th of June. Yesterday, all the excitement was around this announcement that Britam was seeking to buy out Equity Bank's stake in housing finance. Equity Bank rallied 2.173% to close at a fresh lifetime high of 47. It's up a huge 55.371% this year. Britam rallied 9.3% to close at 21.75, and housing finance rallied 8.77% to close at a fresh 2014 high, but housing finance is trading lower today. Safaricom, most actively traded yesterday, closed at 12.65 but was trading 13 at the close, and it's trading at 12.90 to 13 at the moment. Other than that, equity bank KCB set all-time closing highs, and the market, as I said, after a period of softness and basing out, has turned higher, and with some violence. I think we're all set to move higher from here as well. Once again, thank you for stopping by.